The following podcast is sponsored by Basico. At Basico, we understand your needs and pain points. Our expertise in CFO services, legal, finance IT, and people and payroll helps drive your business forward by inspiring change and challenging norms. We believe in deep explorative discussions and critical angles, the same spirit that fuels the Only Constant podcast hosted by our own Lasse Rindom. Discover more about Basico's vision and services at basico.dk. And if you like what you hear in this episode, please don't hesitate to share it with a friend. And now Lasse, take it away.
You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Mahmood Aziz, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi Mahmood, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm super happy you took the time to do this episode with me today, and I've been looking forward to speaking with you on the show. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Lasse. Really great to be here. And like you, I'm looking forward to seeing where this develops today, and especially given the themes you've had on The Constant before, it's going to be fun.
It definitely is. And I also know that you have a ton of experiences and perspectives that I'm really excited to probe. And I think the first thing I want to ask you really is maybe a very broad, open question, but with AI, right, and what's happening right now, what is changing in the world of consultancy and advisory right now?
Wow, that's a great question. I think for me, it's so fast a pace of change, but there are some things that I think will remain. You can't know everything, right? So therefore, there's always going to be a need for some kind of person, entity, or somebody to say, help me understand what's going on, right? So that's the first thing. Whether that comes from a machine, from an AI perspective, or from a person, that's down to individuals. I think we're also at an interesting place within a shift in what I call the demographics. You got a whole bunch of the baby boomers and the Gen Xers like me, who've been around and seen that shift from kind of manual to more helpful technology, right? Both physically and from a software perspective. And then you've got the rise of the kind of Gen Alphas who are, in effect, digital natives. I look at some of the babies and kids that my friends' families have got, and the way they interact with things, totally different, right? My son even, how he has 3 or 4 different streams of consciousness interacting with him. Means that they're more aware of these kind of alternate approaches, right? Whereas we were like looking at focus and one thing. So from a consulting perspective, that means you're going to have people coming through the ranks who can take information in way different formats than we were trained to do in the beginning, right? Normally it was like sitting down person to person, you'd share ideas, you'd share thinking, you might have some other data, but you'd work through kind of almost like I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Frederick Taylor, who was a master of, kind of management science. He kind of, let me look at the process, look at the way things are done, and then we can define the optimal way to do something based on time and motion studies, right? That was back in the early days of factories where manual production was still the norm. If we go forward to today, we got so many different ways of doing things, and the desktop of today, the business of today, has shifted away from people-oriented things to there are many jobs nowadays that are one person looking and communicating with data only, right? They take input from somewhere, they do whatever they want to do, and they shift it on to the next part of the world. So from a consulting perspective, that means you can't just sit down and talk to people. You've got to follow what they're actually doing and with what kind of sources of information or tools or physical things that they have to understand really what's going on. And that's a big difference. With the AI coming in, that means they've got capacity to look at things from a data perspective. We've also got the advent of what I call video feeds, right? So a lot of stuff that people can look at can be based off video images, either as a stream or as a kind of still images, and say, okay, what are people doing? How do they do it? And therefore, the way that AI has developed in the last few years means that the frontier models have trained lots and lots of data on images and video. And it means that we're now pretty certain that the interpretation of the software onto the images and the video feeds are pretty accurate. Obviously, there's still, issues and challenges. So what I'm guessing I'm getting to is that consulting is actually at a very innovative place. And I think the best consultants have always been those that adapt to the circumstances, the context, and their own specialism, right? You can't discount people's expertise. You've got to make sure, that experience matched with innovation or adaptation is what makes you a good person to talk to and figure out and say, how can we get advice, or how can we get some, answers or some recommendations, which is what consulting is all about, right?
Yeah, but so what you're saying is also is sort of like this: the linearity of processes and work has changed a lot, and we're not as people oriented as we used to be either, right? So the sort of, to some extent, the entity, the thing that we can sort of distill and look at in isolation, even people, has sort of disappeared, right? And what you're saying is instead that this has become an information game, it's become a data game. Is follow the data, follow the information, or is that what you were trying to say?
No, what I'm saying is that the advent of AI has allowed some of that, the ability of technology to support the consultant in working out where they're going and what they need to do, and the recommendations or a strategy or a optimization or whatever it is, right? Because consultancy is a big field. And so you've got to remember that it depends what kind of consulting you're in, all the way up from the big thing.
But I get that also with the AI, but you also said the Gen Alphas who are working in different formats, have multiple different streams at the same time. So there's something, the human consulting, the human agent, the human worker is changing to become more of a, I don't know, what drives it now? Is it?
I think it's contextual, right? If there's a lot of data and you're doing something which is about data driven, then obviously you've got to play around and you've got to be a better data analyst, right? Also, you need to be a great researcher. You've got to figure out where is this stuff held, because documents are disappearing and everything's digital. Then you're on a journey and a hunt to say who's actually got hold of it, right? Where do I find? You've also got systems of record, and as you mentioned somewhere along, we'll come on to this topic, there are new systems being created, right, that also hold this information. Therefore, it's like the biggest challenge with being a consultant is what's the actual reality? Who holds the information that I can use to create the insight? Now, does that mean I have to start with the raw data, or I look at knowledge that's been gathered before I apply my thinking and expertise to do wisdom? Or is it something else entirely? The analogy always used to be that you played around with the Lego bricks, right, until they gave shape and a construct. The question is, are we dealing with just Lego bricks anymore, or is it Lego plus Meccano plus something else? And that's another challenge in terms of the analogy I'm trying to get to. From the human perspective, young consultants coming in are going to have this different frame of referencing and ability to process that perhaps I don't have, right? We were trained in a certain way that said, you work with the people, and you've got elder people around you who've been through these experiences and have got different levels of knowledge and expertise. You don't need that anymore with AI, because you might have the distillation of a whole company's consulting experience to draw upon from a kind of SLM or, custom GPTs or whatever people are building, right? I understand that people like McKinsey's and PwC and Deloitte, they've created vast amounts of, custom agents that they're using to help drive their work. And I think that's the difference, is that you don't have to find a person to say, what's the sum total of experiences I could draw upon?
No,
That's another new factor.
But it's a sort of, I'm thinking all the time in sort of an expectation that the deterministic stuff will be fixed by machines. So it becomes something else we're looking for all the time, something else we're asking for. We're asking for the spark from consultants instead of just, the procedural know-how and mapping up. Is there an expectation that nothing we do today will be the same tomorrow, and then that's why we need to sort of make frameworks for flux?
Maybe. Look, I look at it another way, in that everything we're doing, everything we use are tools. And tools have two inherent fundamental constraints. One is the one we can think about the most, which is the limits of the tool itself. And sometimes we don't even know them. So even with all the AI that's going around right now, how many of us can truly say we understand the limits that are there? We kind of know the problems. What do we know about the limits? So that's one thing. The second dimension that I look at always is the limits of your own knowledge. So the limits of the user or the person who's using the tool. And this is where we're at right now, is that there's still so much uncertainty or misunderstanding about the limits. We don't know where our limits are. And what's tended to happen in the past, the phrase, necessity is the mother of all invention, is paramount, in that humans being intuitive, being self-aware, critically thinking, but also that thing you mentioned earlier, the spark, right? The intuition, or the kind of eureka moments where we can bring together so many different parts of something and come up with a way of thinking or behavior or use of something which no one ever thought about before. And that creativity is the bit I think will always remain human. The emotional side of things is another area, right? When to use something is not the same as doing something because it's recommended.
No, but this is, and now you're touching upon something that's like super interesting for the whole AI age, right? The necessity is the mother of invention, right? But did anyone need a Gen AI model, a large language model, or did we know even though everyone's saying that this is a tool you need to use, does that mean you need to use it? So there's been, I spoke on this on a couple of episodes, but especially with Mark Lawn, about how we've made, we're trying to make markets for tools, right? Not tools for markets. And of course, there's a lot of value here, but there's also a lot of investment, a lot of maybe even over investment compared to the revenue and the consumption right now. You could argue that, I think, fairly. It's not even an exaggeration, I think. So what are we actually looking at here? Are we still looking at necessity? Is it still necessity that's driving it, or is it some kind of expectation that the future will be different from anything we can see? I'm always so preoccupied with: are we really looking at where we are today and moving the needle from here? Or are we optimizing for scenarios that become slightly more, sci-fi?
Yeah. So look, as a young man, right, I grew up reading a lot of the Victorian kind of explorer type authors, Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, and beyond, right, Edgar Rice Burroughs and more, right, and then going on to sci-fi and fantasy beyond that, right. So my imagination, right, growing up as a kid was, we had all these programs on TV about space and UFOs and alien races, and there was a whole bunch, but we were also grounded in the reality of kind of like, the cowboys and Indians, the police and the criminals, and lots of different things that were much more practical. So I sense, in one sense, the sci-fi future, dystopian or Blade Runner type thing, possible. Minority Report, possible. Predictions are getting, the mathematics are becoming so much more easy to do in complex, computations because of computing power, right? The flip side of it is the H.G. Wells utopia, where, humans don't have to do anything and we sit around all day and we question, we have existence, we do philosophy, we do art, we do more mundane human things, right? They're still all possible. I think that the technology, and this is an interesting area, it goes back to, if you remember, it's a tool. Should we be in control of the tool, or should be the tool be in control of us? And that's the dichotomy that we're facing, I think, for a lot of people, that they're worried that the tool is going to take over what we do. But on the flip side, I also say that's in the hands of how you understand the tool and what you can use it for. And when you master these things, just like with any other discipline, right? The 10,000 hours you put into understanding something, saying, I'm a master craftsman of what I do, that's where the real spark's going to come. And you're right in a sense, we maybe are making markets for the tools, but fundamentally the market always has separated out those things that are truly useful versus kind of, okay, it's a fad, we've used it for a bit, let's move on. And I think the other danger we have, especially when I'm talking to my colleagues and my peers and people who've been in the technology game for a long time, we have a fundamental assumption that actually everyone has the same understanding of what these tools are as we have, whereas actually 99% of the world, they're right behind that. They're still using it as a search engine, right? Tell me what the cheapest, whatever it is. So I think there's a big gap, and Geoffrey Moore in his book, right, Crossing the Chasm, talks about it, right? We've got the truly bleeding edge people, the early adopters, and then the chasm to say mass adoption. So yes, it's become mass adoption in the sense that people are aware of it, but who truly uses it day in, day out and makes it part of their world? So
how far away is the Fable 5 things from Anthropic right now, from everywhere they use from people? It's like massive. It's like the distance is
who can afford
insane. Yeah.
And I think so. Go back to your question about this whole piece about, is the technology going to drive us down certain pathways? That always comes back down to what kind of guardrails we put in the use. And at the moment,
well, let me just rephrase it a little bit, because I think that I agree with you on the long-term sci-fi thing, right? And that was not necessarily what I was getting at, but I just realized that while you're answering my question as well, because the long-term sci-fi thing is something that's always sort of dismissed also by technologists and AI hypesters and these crazy enthusiasts who just know. I know. Yeah. Anyway, I won't give more denominations for what they typically are or what they buy, but there's some types out there, right? That but I think that what they typically do is they say some kind of midterm sci-fi thing. They go there instead. So they say this is still something that's happening. It's coming in 3 years. They don't go 10, 20 years, because 10, 20 years always ends up being evil. It's so easy to flip that evil as well, and they don't want to be evil. Right? No one wants to say they're doing evil stuff, or Clone Wars and Star Wars, something like that. No, that's not. But the midterm sci-fi thing is still saying that in 3 years this will happen, in 4 years, and so it becomes an enterprise mandate to do things right this way. You have to move towards this, but it's still something that when the market moves faster, 3 years can be a long time, and the fluctuations and the changes and the uncertainty is massive in 3 years. And that's why I think that we are still talking sci-fi when we're talking just 3 to 4 or 5 years out in the future right now. But it's not, the full sci-fi, Dune vision. To get what I'm getting at. So I think there's some kind of, we're sort of midterming this. While I think that short term, there's still some value. You say, oh, maybe this will happen. Maybe we'll be able to do this in 2 years or in the future. Great. But what can I do right now? I have to focus on what can I change now, so it doesn't become, tech deflation, where it becomes a state of inaction because tomorrow it'll be cheaper because it will be better, right?
So if I take a look at, I draw upon my own experiences, right? Because that's all we can do. We can draw upon our own experiences. If I look at
exactly my point, actually.
Right? So we've got to keep on drawing on those experiences to figure out and say, look, there are many ways of looking at it. As humans, right, we got some biological hardwiring into our thinking. Not everybody has the breadth of thinking as another person, but hardwired, we have the things we do automatically, autonomously. And then they have the things that we've got to step back and say, I don't normally do this, and therefore I've got to apply my frontal cortex thinking of capabilities to say, what do I do? Jeffrey Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, and his follow-up books and so on, talk about this. And there's lots of examples everywhere about what we're doing as a kind of function of our being, existence, versus those things that we consciously choose to do something about. And I think this is a piece that we've got to be mindful of as we develop these kind of midterm cycles of thinking. the podcast, right, that you do is based around helping people and businesses, right? So we focus on the world of work rather than the world of humans and what we do outside of work. I think most enterprises have got choices. They have to start saying, what bits of this journey do I want to invest in? And that goes back to the basic things and fundamentals of being a business, which is, what am I building? What's it for? What are the outcomes? What's my medium-term strategy that this links to? What is the roadmap of how to get there? And what are the things I've got to do now to get to my end goal? And that's also based on resources. So each board, each business leader has to come to that position and say, do I build, buy, do nothing? Because these are the, typically the three things that we do. And in my experiences, I've gone through life, right? People typically do those things that are expedient, but also tied into their personal goals. And this is the piece that I think is very different when it comes to consultancy, recommendations versus people's behavior, which is not always based on rational, logical thinking or the right recommendation based on somebody else's objective view. We get to the subjective, and that subjective is the bit that makes us human. It's the irrational part. It's the emotional part. It's the ambitious part. It's the bloody-mindedness part, maybe, right? Or something else entirely. So for me, this thinking about, within the next 3-4 years, well, you know what? There's a whole bunch of subjects that no one touches upon when we look at AI. And for me, you can't look at one thing in isolation. This is the danger. We tend to become myopic when having these kind of conversations and say, the topic is X, let's focus on X. But remember, X is contextual as well. And computing power, there's a lot of talk recently about, Scotland's going to build about 17 data centers. What's that going to do with the amount of water it's going to need per day? How's that going to affect the local ecosystem, right? Ecology, biomes, whatever. On top of that, we've got then different countries going, damn, we don't need these foundation models in the hands of private companies that are based somewhere else. We've got to create our own sovereign AI models. So now there's a whole bunch of, not protectionism, but some kind of, we've got to get closer to what these guys have shown the way, right? Imitation is the best form of flattery. But it's also protectionism in some way, a nationalism or some other thing that says we have to be more in control of the information. But that goes back to politics, which I'm not going to touch on. I think it's an interesting area, but politics shouldn't be part of what we talk about from a practitioner's point of view in this context.
No, but what you're saying here is also these two things, right? Talking about how much water is going to drink, right, and building these data centers, and that's also based on and build your own models on the assumption that this in 3 years will be something we need to do, right? Because right now you don't see yet the value from these things. It's starting. Things are starting to stir, right? But it's still small. It's like very much vibe coding stuff where you have the value, or AI-assisted code where you have a lot of value right now. But it was like, this will be so big that we're going to build 17 data centers across Scotland, that we're going to do our own model. And, the sovereignty, and I've spoken to people about that as well, right? We are midterm sci-fi because we're projecting based on, we are, and I believe this will happen as well. I believe this technology will have a massive impact, but we're not taking it from where, the trajectory, are we?
No. Look, I agree with you in the sense of that trajectory, that midterm sci-fi piece is driving a lot of things. But is that because there's a conscious strategy to do something? Or is it a reactive approach to what's been shown in terms of what's possible? So we're in that middle state where actually the limits of our knowledge are hampering our ability to figure out the right strategy.
Yeah, and
the other thing that's happened,
right? We just do capex investments, but they never win, right? Capex don't win the future.
I think there's a piece that is, and funny enough, Avi and I will talk about this as part of our work this week, which is there needs to be more effort in what the operating model is going to look like. And this is the great unknown at the moment, because if you look at most enterprise and mid-term companies who have invested and are doing something and they're trying to embed as part of the fabric of their work, even their operating models are not fully defined yet. They're kind of learning as they go and trying to figure it out. There's no, in the old days, you would say, what do we need it to be? Then let's design that operating model, then fit people, process, technology, data, and enterprise architecture to that. Right now, we're kind of doing it in the expectation that AI is big enough that we will find the path. And this is a big danger. So I think for me, this medium-term view, my bet, I think, like with all technology beforehand, AI will get embedded in some parts of the workplace where it's useful. And then slowly over time, it'll become, okay, where do we put it to where it's needed additionally? Look, I have seen countless, and you might have seen this with your work with RPA, right? We both come from the RPA background.
I was just going to ask you now for credibility. I'm going to ask you, man, but before you answer, right? Did you sell a bot for everyone in the RPA heydays?
No.
You didn't?
Blue Prism was very much, we went out and said, this is enterprise. You've got to look at it from the processes. You've got to look at it from the point of view of where is it going to work best? And I was actually pretty gutted that we responded as Blue Prism. So we're looking for Blue Prism, right? So we responded to UiPath, finding that, let's find everybody in the organization, give them a bot and tell them to do it themselves. And we competed at their level rather than sticking to the enterprise approach. I think that fundamentally changed the nature of how people saw RPA as well, in that a desktop on it, a robot for every desktop was the answer. It's not, because you know what? History also tells me we humans are great at saying, yes, we're going to do something, and then sticking back to the tried and trusted that we've known for a few years in our role, right? Automatic thinking versus having to use our prefrontal cortex and actually think about what I'm doing. No one wants to do that.
No, but it made RPA silly, right? A bot for everyone. It became silly. So it didn't. Not silly. It's the wrong word, but it lost some of its. I don't know.
Impact. It lost its impact, and the reason it lost its impact is because we were trying to get people who. This issue of limitations of knowledge and limitations of the tool, right? We were trying to get people to do something that they weren't designed to do. It's not easy for everyone who works to think, how can I improve what I do? No. Many people don't have that reflective capability either.
No, Tim Reiner also said, I said to me once, I don't know if I'm on the podcast episode with him, that RPA is not dead if it still fixes the problem, right? So, and the thing is that RPA is a great technology. It has a lot of applications, right? You can use it for that are really great. But when you then say the bar is that everyone should use it, and then 2 years later, no, and not everyone is using it, then it's like, oh, it's such a disappointing technology. And are we? Well, it isn't. But are we at the same? Are we? Is it now? Everyone's saying everyone can build software, right? But as I saw a post the other day, I also reposted it actually. The way but most people can't even boil an egg or something like that. And now they have to make software, right? Now you get my point. So are we heading for the same kind of disappointment there? Do you think?
My experience and my research tells me that we will spend a lot of money on things that will end up as shelfware. It's the history of technology, right? Yeah. It's the history of technology. Even if you go to most organizations and talk to a person and you ask them, and I remember this, right? Because I started, my first job in kind of technology was working for an ERP company, Dutch ERP company called Exact. They're still around, but I spent the first 3 to 6 months in support while I was training to become a consultant, right? To learn how it worked. And when you work in support, you realize how predictable most humans are in the sense of how they do things. We are pattern machines. We find a pattern we like, we think that pattern is good enough for me, and we follow the pattern. I mean, look at how hard it is to break habits. And look at how much of your day you do based on the patterns of what you've learned over time. Most people learn by osmosis. They get shown something, the training is like, here's a day, here's a 2, now get on with your job, right? Ask me questions when you come back. But what happens is that in modern workplaces, we seem to be inordinately busy. I'm not talking about productivity, but we seem to be inordinately busy. because the number of inputs we're getting has dramatically increased to what we used to have, right? We've got our personal life and we've got a professional life, and they mix because of the devices we have. So while at work, and I've deliberately kind of put my phone on silent, it's on a focus mode, do not disturb, right? Because this hour and a half is special, right? It's boxed. I want to concentrate on this. But for most people at work, think about the amount of distractions they give themselves because of the multiple inputs that they've created for themselves. Yeah. They've created that habit and they don't break it. They see it as normal. And the piece that we talk about, this shelfware activity and the use of software and the story linking back to support, was every week the same person or persons would ring up with the same questions that we'd answered already. They hadn't made a note of it. They just wanted the answer so they could get on and do their thing. And I think that we have nearly everything, personally and professionally. I've got devices and apps and tools that I bought, downloaded, spent money on, spent some time on, and then just kind of, okay, it's sitting there. So my own experiences, I'm not talking about anyone else, and I'm sure it's mirrored by other people and the listeners, but my own experiences tell me that we're really good at thinking about something. It's innovative, it's new, I'll play around with it, I'll do something. But we have this spike, and the Gartner hype cycle is real. We go to the trough of disillusionment, and then we come back up, and then we got the people who are truly going to use something for a consistent and concerted period of time.
But is this where, I can't help but think, shelfware, and then I think about books, and then I think about thinking, and think about, attention span, and how many people can concentrate on reading a book. Then I think about, have we put the thinking into the trough of disillusionment, right? Are we putting thinking on the shelf, Mahmood, right now? And will we realize later that it's quite important again, right? And will we start reading books again? There's a lot of things here, I think. Shelfware is books, right? Are they on the shelf?
Hey, listen, my niece was here a couple of days ago, right? She's 19, just finished her first year at university. She's doing interesting topics, wants to go into law. But she came over and visited. And one of the things that she said, can I look at your book collection? Because I actually, when I was younger, bought a lot of books. But I've noticed in the last 5 years, I've gone digital native. There's very few books I get. There's a few, but physically, I'm now reading either on my screen or on the Kindle.
Yeah.
I miss books, right? I keep them. I've got thousands.
I started buying books I liked on Kindle. I've started buying them physically as well because
right.
I don't know, it's a little bit
both
weird,
ways. But your point, but the point is that we've got young kids who are saying, I like the physical. But we also have a problem. And I tease my kids and my nieces and nephews and other young people all the time. I said, you guys don't know what it's like to go and find something out from the first principle because you've been taught or you've had the capacity or capability to just go type into a screen or your phone or say a message, tell me the answer. Now, as humans, is this what we should be teaching our children? For me, it's not, right? I was brought up in a different age, maybe, and the schooling was slightly different.
No, but it's the dream, right? But the weird thing is, Mahmood, this is the dream of all generations forever in humanity. Just go to something and ask it for and get an answer, right? Yeah. So it's weird saying that, no, we shouldn't have that. But if you asked anyone 1,000 years ago to be like, yeah, please, man, just give me that.
Yeah. Look, the oracle, right? We had the oracle at Delphi in Greek mythology and Greek history. Probably true, right? But people went and said, help me. And if you look at it, we've always had this situation, tribal to communities, to cities, to societies, to beyond. We're always looking for other people for either help or validation. A couple of things. It's our fragility of our egos, perhaps. And I say to kids today, you guys have no idea that you've got all this knowledge at your fingertips, and yet we use such a small fraction to do something. It's the more we know, the more we have, the harder it is to break that pattern of, I know what I know, I do what I do, I don't want to do anything more. Now, is that to do with the tools we got, the technology that we've got, or is it actually to do with the way that we as people, parents even, I don't know if you've got kids, but I look at it from, I've got 2 boys, that they're in the world of work or about to join the world of work. And for me, my thing was, how can I get them curious about the world to be able to go and have a little bit of thinking for themselves rather than just rely on other people.
But
Come on, be self-sufficient.
It's becoming for me, and also with LLMs, and I want to talk maybe about that later. I talk about it all the time, but it's become this, between the abstraction and the concrete, between the idea and the phenomenon, between the signifier and the signified, and there's this, you can ask about anything and get a general answer, but can you also dive into the specifics of it, right? And there's some sort of trade-off all the time. There's the very Icarus, Prometheus, whatever. You get too close to the sun, you get fire, you get burned by you're hunted by the gods, and there's this. It's like now we got what we always wanted, right? Now we're like, oh, then we're losing what we always loved having, but which was our struggle. What is wrong with us? What is wrong with us, right, Mahmood? What is wrong with us?
I don't think there's anything wrong. We're human, right? We're fallible. And this is the thing that I wrote a paper about 12 years ago. I can
get no satisfaction, right? That's maybe the only thing,
Perhaps, right? Or, the best things in life are free, right? If you go back to that. But going back to the paper I wrote 12 years ago, right? It was actually what businesses can learn from young babies and toddlers. And I made the kind of distinctions about what they do and how they behave, because this is biology in action. I was looking at them and I was curious. I had kids at the time and I was watching, and my sister was having babies, and it just struck me. Maybe we've been told a lot of things that are not the right thing, as my perspective, when we were at school. There's a lot of fear built into the school system in the Western world. I don't know about elsewhere, right? Because I can only talk about Europe and what I've seen in America and so on, about failure. This word failure is seen as a negative connotation, right? And people go through life with this fear of failure.
Yeah.
But when you look at kids, newborns, and look at their patterns of behavior, failure to them is the journey in finding out what works or doesn't. And this is a really interesting thing. About a few years back, I came across an acronym. I'm sure you may have come across it, but failure or fail is the first attempt at learning. The scholars and people from the past were the scientists. They were experimenters. And to experiment means you come up and you have a hypothesis. But we've lost that art of saying hypothesis means you've got to try lots of different things out until you come to a synthesis.
Yeah, we want to get the synthesis and believe that it's absolute.
Right. Rather than what are the pathways to get to the synthesis? And have I done as many things as I could to figure out, the answer? And same with AI, right? And so this technology and all the tools that we've had is that we think that the answer in the form of the tool is the synthesis that we need. It's been sold as such, right? It's marketed as such.
Yeah, it is, but also the whole there's also the Elon Musk going this is an unbiased AI, or people hunting for unbiased, non-hallucinating AI, and it's just like there's nothing that, and people are like, oh, AI is jacked. It's good at some things, but not good at other things. Yeah, the world is jacked, guys. There's no absolute God out there, whatever you believe, but there's in essence you can't probe that, right? It's not like you just go and ask God and you find a God model, a machine that's unfallible. The truth is not out there. The truth is an interpretation. It's a contextualized interpretation at any time, right? It's also, all I know is what I do not know. Or I quoted this Günter Grass poem a lot of times. I'm not going to do it in German because I've done it, I think, 2 times in this show already. But when he says that, his old typewriter is witness to how often he lies. And from edition to edition, the truth is one typo closer.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I agree with everything you said, because we're also the masters of lying to ourselves, right? Our brain, because of the way it works, and this is why it's difficult for programmers and mathematicians, even the most cleverest, to then map the human synaptic way of working in the neural network to machine language, right? Because we've got these other things. We flood our brain with chemicals. The chemical cause emotional responses, not logical responses, right? We're a biomechanical nervous electrical system. We're not one or the other. And it's that combination of all the things that, our mind, the consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. And that consciousness is constantly, and the more I learn about neuroscience and neuroplasticity and all these kind of things and cognitive behavior, the more you research into these areas, you kind of realize how much of what you do, sometimes you can't control it because it's the hardwired triggers in how you behave to the triggers and the visual clues that are around you, right? Both physical and emotional and so on. And this is where the challenge comes with thinking as, AI being the answer to everything. It's great at organizing, collecting the information. It's got patterns and algorithms in there that says, and again, I don't claim to know anything about how, OpenAI and Anthropic and Google with DeepMind have been building what they're doing, right? It's way too clever for me. My brain can't comprehend that level at the moment. But what I do understand is that you can give, and I'm one of those idiots, right? You can give an idiot every book. Do I understand the damn thing? Have I got the capacity, without doing something else, to go away and say, I interpreted the words on the page and they had some meaning to me in the meaning that the author meant, right? It took me a long time to figure out what codec meant. Originally, it was coding, decoding. And I was like, oh, duh, that's what's a codec, right? But if you read, I read when I was young, about 18, 19, I read an author called Umberto Eco. Right, he was a professor at Bologna University, right, and semantics. But I read his fiction books first, and then went to kind of read the other stuff. And I realized he was a professor of semantics. And I was saying, oh, this is what semantics is. Okay, it's the meanings in words, but it's how we interpret them. And this is a challenge for everybody who's working in technology, is that someone came up with the idea of what the meaning should be. But the person at the other side of it who used it gave their own interpretation. And then we lead to this mismatching of things.
I also bought it recently, but I've only been skimming through it. I also need to sit down and concentrate on reading books at the moment. It's a different topic, but Carissa Veli's prophecy, right? Because I think what you just said, it's made me think that we're visionary animals all the time. So we're always envisioning something or future, or I'm sitting in a mute box right now doing this recording, but I'm envisioning what's going on outside it. I have no clue what's going on, but I imagine it's sort of stable and all that, and we do that all the time with everything. So it becomes a battle for the future, and that's what she also puts forward in the book, that the prophecy is power, right? And who can prophesize the most, and the prophecies coming out of Silicon Valley and so on. Obviously it becomes a very technology oriented book.
But we're also, Lasse, we're slightly blinded, right? Because we're getting very narrow viewpoints from certain centers and points of influence.
Yeah, but what you say, you don't even know what's going on in your mind, right? That's what you just said.
That's what I said.
How can you then predict what's going to happen in 3 years, right? That's the thing.
I think that's, but isn't that when you? And I don't want to get too philosophical, right? Because
please do.
Interesting. But when you get philosophical and you talk about, why am I here? It's a topic that's not spoken about in schools, right? It used to be that in generations of mine and before, that there was some kind of faith-based something providing that morality and values-based system to give you meaning, right? You're here because of A, B, and C. Yeah. As we become more non-faith-based in terms of our, societies and thinking and so on, it's that we're looking for a different kind of meaning. But philosophically, if you go back to the ancient philosophers and the ancient religions, think how many of them talk about the now. They talk about the present. And, a lot of things around this area in terms of people's mental health, right? Since COVID, and I worked in the NHS for 6 years, and we saw that massive spike. As soon as COVID hit, the year afterwards, mental health problems increased by 100%. So what used to be 1 in 5 people became 1 in 2.5, 1 in 2 people had mental health challenges of some kind. impact of how we worked and our behavior and our ability to engage with people has changed. There are kids I know who join jobs and they're remote. They don't go to the office. They don't see other people. They're kind of, onboarded. They do their job and they're isolated. And Gen Xers and Gen Alphas and Gen Zs and all the rest of these guys, they're all set their game. There's an issue at work because the younger people want a certain way of thinking and working and behavior. And yet we're not giving them that generation. As I said earlier, when I joined the world of work, I had people in different layers who would teach me things and give me different perspectives. And I think that piece is really important as we go through. So the philosophy side of things is, can I live in the present and not think about the future? Number one. And that will allow me to have a better sense of myself. And this is what Zen, Buddhism, I Ching, the Tao, all these kind of things they talk about. And then it goes back to the other piece, which is the bombardment of input, visual in terms of reels, movies, whatever, pictures, memes, whatever, right? We've got so much more coming in. Our brains are always busy. And why mental health become an issue is because where's our downtime? We used to have a lot more downtime. We used to go out. We used to, people went out into nature. They took holidays more often. They had interests and hobbies that were nothing to do with the work, right? Nearly everybody in my generation, their fathers had some kind of workshop or a garage, or they tinkered on hobbies and, they did practical, creative things. We don't see that as much because more and more of our inputs and our engagements are digital. So that means our brains are always on. And if your brain's always on, how can we do that kind of downtime that says, I want to switch off, I don't want to think about anything? And it's even worse, I think, for half the population. I recently learned a few years ago through some other research about cognitive patterns of behavior and thinking between men and women. And what I understood, and the analogy is that, men, our thinking is compartmentalized. In that when we do something, we're totally focused on that one thing, and we're not thinking about anything else at any point. The way that women thinking, and I'm trying not to be disrespectful to anyone, but you could do the research, is that they have a lot more chemicals and hormones in their bodies, and their thinking is based not from compartmentalized, but from emotive sources. And therefore, all of their thinking is like one great big long, ball of yarn connected together, and everything touches everything. And at any one time, they could be thinking of a million things at once, and their brains don't stop. And men have one box or compartment that women don't have and can not necessarily have. And it's a joke, but it's probably true, right? I can sit and I could just zone out. And when someone says, what are you doing? I'm doing nothing. I will literally be doing nothing. I'll just be existing. I won't have thoughts. I won't have any kind of vision in mind. I won't be, looking at it, whatever. I'll just be in a place where I exist, but without doing anything, thinking anything. And apparently, a woman can't do that. And it's because of the way our thinking behaviors and our cognitive biases and our chemicals and all that other stuff, cognitive behaviors and our neuroplasticity and all the rest of it is connected to everything.
But you can also add neuroatypical people to that, because there's a lot of those as well. And
neurodivergent.
Because neurodivergent, because I didn't want to. I'm always afraid of going into essentialisms about gender and all that. I read too much Judith Butler and fluid genders and all that too. But I get your point about the different minds, right? And how different minds, and because you see that, that you've met the people who, and also met men who have the same and women who have the opposite. And of course, that's the way it is, right? I think the interesting thing about what you were just saying also, and also before that, was how the past and the future, right? That there's, I don't know if it was Aristotle or someone saying that now is limited by two things that do not exist, right? The past and the future.
Yes.
And
Correct.
but still, at the same time, everything we're doing, everything when we're seeing videos and reels, we're seeing something that already happened, someone did for us. We are in sort of a past, or we're in a future all the time. We're always living in what next, or what did I just, we're never really living in what's unfolding right now, right? Or we're preserving things, taking photos of it for the future. That's maybe back to what I said before, right? Are we losing track of what we're good at doing right now when we're thinking too much about building data centers for an AI in the future that we don't necessarily know how it's going to unfold, right? I think that's interesting. But let me just ask you another question, because I want to move to something else as well, right? Because there's been so much focus on everything that AI can do or could do or will be doing stuff, right? But I want to ask you, what does it actually take to make AI valuable in enterprises? Is it all about doing things, right? I saw some software vendors that started calling themselves systems of actions, right, instead of systems of records.
Yes.
But shouldn't they be, systems of trust, right?
Hey, listen, that's the $64,000 question everywhere, right? Ever since technology has been used to do something, people are saying, is this the right answer? I mean, if you look at one of the things that has always been, and maybe I'm giving too much away about the constant later on, but who holds the source, the golden source of information? And if you asked anybody in any medium, large enterprise, it doesn't exist. And so what we're building, AI is going to help answer. It's not going to be the answer, because systems of action, of trust, whatever you want to call it, are creating more information and more data to be analyzed and interpreted. And it's almost like a recursive cycle. The more you have in terms of systems of action, the more variability you're going to get in the systems of record and the answers and the interpretations. Potentially, you can, set guardrails around it. However,
you said before, we don't need more action. We don't need more things to happen. We need lesser and more relevant things, maybe.
And this, again, so latest research this year, a number of different studies, you can check them out, but they're saying something like 70-85% of AI pilots never make it to production. Any kind of POC, any kind of proved value, or sort of test it out, have it for free, use it, they don't make it to production. So you've got to ask yourself, why is that? Now, this is not an AI issue. This is the common technology issue. And the technology issue also comes back to a point we made earlier, which is we don't know what that 3-year strategy is. How can we then advocate for a roadmap of things to do to get to that 3-year midterm future, right? If it's in a state of flux, what can we do? And as humans, what we could do is going back to tried and trusted methods, which is to say, number one, why are we doing this? Simon Sinek says, start with why. And when you start with why, then you go back to, we've got to have some kind of business justification that says, we have some issues and challenges in what we do, how we do it, the way we do it, who we do it with, that we need to resolve.
Yeah.
And if we're going to resolve something,
you need to have a consumer at least, right? Why are we consuming this? Not just the buyer,
or a sponsor.
But someone inside the company who wants to consume the produce of what you're doing with this, and wants to use it, or ends up using it, or there has to be a reason, a rhyme and a reason, right?
Right. Look, even 5 years ago, I think, what was the answer? 4% of boards had AI as a topic. 5 years ago, right? Now, if you go today and probably do the research, I haven't seen it recently, but I would suspect that's a lot higher, but still not as high as people think. Still not, because there are lots of industries where you sit there going, why would I need AI as a common thing or the board-focused thing to worry about?
Yeah.
Right? And therefore, the question comes back and says, how many boards, senior leaders, the consumers are interested in consuming AI and the things it brings? And there's another part of me, and you would recognize this as well. RPA and intelligent automation and the things around that discipline, they're not embedded properly. And I think we've still got a long way to go for lots of those tools and technologies to be giving the return on value that they expected. So,
well, even ERPs are not probably implemented yet, right? No,
well,
I'm not joking. It's not a joke. It's truth.
most vendors I know are retrospectively fitting some kind of AI connection to LLMs and using it to make their product seem more sexy. To me, that's a bit of a misnomer. Really, you should be saying, go back to basics. What do your users need? What do they really want from your solution to provide that you're not giving, and give them that. But what they're tending to do is to jump on the bandwagon. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It's giving them an opportunity to engage with their users. And I think that's the ultimate test. The consumer, as you said earlier, will drive the practical application of these tools and technologies. And there's a certain area that says, okay, any business, its prime function is to deliver, if you're a public company, it's shareholder value. If you're a medium-sized business, family business, or something else, it's returns to those directors and owners. Right? And along the way, it obviously provides employment to lots of people. And therefore, you're helping society in a broader term. From that perspective, unless the reason you did that pilot or that proof of concept or introduce a new technology into your business has a successful business outcome attached to it that says, here's what we're trying to solve, fix, improve, reduce, whatever it might be, the same as any other technology, should it be used in the first place? And I suspect many AI vendors, if you were to push them and say, can you help me write a business case that articulates that what you provide delivers a value, or what is that value? How many of them are going to fall short?
Yeah, that's the measurement of KPI of whether it makes sense or not, right? That's the big problem right now as well, right?
Yeah, there's an insurance thing coming on in a few weeks where Aviva is going to talk about how they've reduced fraudulent claims by implementing lots of tools and technologies, some of which are AI related. But they've actually said, we don't care about the fact that this is in production. We're now linking it to an outcome. So the business case can be demonstrated. And I think that's an important shift this year, is that we're starting to see real results from people implementing. But knowing what I know of that organization and having talked to them 18 months ago, I also know that they didn't just plug in a frontier model LLM type solution. They've been building lots of things over the past 5-10 years using lots of different tools and technologies from the AI landscape. And the problem we've got is that most people are using AI synonymously with the LLMs and the frontier models. But they're ignoring all the other things that have been in play for more than 50, 60 years. And this is a big challenge as well. What is AI?
There's been so much, like we talked about before, so many things that have not been probably implemented, right? I think also, the whole file structure we had on drives that didn't necessarily work out, and then we moved it all to SharePoint and nothing fixed it, right? There's no business case on that, and most companies didn't have a business case for going cloud. Most of them needed some bots. Most actually have a really positive business case, I think, on going with an ERP, but they're still not implemented the right way, but they still automate a lot of people. I think we're sort of huddling through, right? We're sort of, stumbling into digitalization all the time, right?
Yeah.
It's
isn't
jacked.
that normal though? Right? Is it normal? To me, the fundamental thing is humans, we strive to bring order out of chaos. I learned somewhere when I was a kid, right? Chemistry, there was something called entropy, right? The whole universe is moving towards chaos.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is we're trying to put order and structure on that journey.
Yeah.
So you could say that we are going against nature, perhaps. And is it that what we're doing is that when we bring that structure in, we're actually saying this is the framework on how we can deal with things as a business, as individuals.
But that framework is not necessarily on, and you could think that it's about order and processes and technology and all that. But you said before that everything is, people are afraid of failure. You said that earlier in the episode.
Right.
It's all about failure. And that always leads me to say, that is what the most enterprises are built around: failure and accountability. Who's accountable? Who can we blame when things go wrong, right? And that's why you have silos. Everyone's like, oh, why do we have these silos? They're killing things. But you have them because someone has to be accountable for things. Someone has to take the blame. Period. That's how it works.
I think that's a slightly cynical view of it. When you come from a management consultant perspective and you look at how organizations were put together, actually it was done from the point of view of responsibility. It wasn't accountable. It was actually how can someone take charge of that thing and make it do whatever it needs to do. So there's an alternative perspective there.
Yeah, but in the end he'll be asked by someone, is it still working?
Sure, right? But it depends on your position, right? This is why if you're working in large organizations, and especially the banks, right, or insurance companies or whatever, getting to an MD is like the thing, because then you're the boss. You've got people accountable to you.
But this is the thing, right? Responsible
decision
is action.
Making. Wait, there's a further piece around this, which is about decision making and decision taking. How many people actually have authority, or do they give themselves authority to take a decision in a work environment?
How many people are autonomous already, right? So now we get autonomous spots, but how many of us have been autonomous in our work lives, right? Ask that question multiple times.
Right? So if you follow that train of thought and go back to, right, what we're trying to do, and this gives the human behavior piece about why things are not working so well, that fear of failure is because we don't want to be seen as someone who is dispensable. Right? It's not performative anymore. It's about disposability, especially in America, where the employment laws are so different. Right? You can be sacked immediately. It's like, okay, thanks a lot. You're no longer needed. We don't need you. Bye bye. Pick up your box and go. And in Europe and the UK, we have a slightly different process. So therefore, the behavior patterns are different. But it also leads to a different risk appetite.
Yeah.
And this is another thing that you've got to get to, right? We haven't mentioned risk at all. We're like an hour in, and then this is the first time we talk about risk. The risk of doing something or not doing something is not equal. And risk assessment is where most people go down in terms of that decision taking. For employees in most positions that I come across who've been given access to technology and the tools and so on, they're not the decision maker. There's been a top down normally, right? Certain cases, maybe like the citizen developer who bought in UiPath and Dots and it was free and they played around with it and started doing something, right? People took a bit of a pod shot, but at the end of the day, they thought they were doing it just to help themselves. It wasn't like I'm doing it for everyone. So the risk appetite, the decision making capability, they're at odds with each other. If you look at many performance review systems across the planet, they all look at people's ability to say, I want to help move things forward. But the patterns of behavior means that people are risk averse to take and do something that's out of the norm than what they've been taught to do or what they're expected to do, because they think it will be a negative connotation.
But that's what I was getting at, right? The accountability is sort of Trump's responsibility. In the end, you'll do things if you are sure it will not come back to bite you, right? Then you're fine.
That's your interpretation, right? It depends on your risk appetite.
Yeah, it does. But in enterprise, especially the larger enterprises, the larger a company becomes, right, then I think accountability starts, driving more and more structures and more rationales.
What you do.
But my point is, let me get to my point. My point is that what we're doing with these AI agent systems is, and the reason why we may be doing this midterm sci-fi thing is to say, away with the with the accountability, right, in the hierarchy. Get the accountability away. Let's forget about it, Let's just say we want machines that can do, because that's the future. That's, it's just responsibility. Just do. But what I think we're missing is who's accountable, where's the trust, who will end up getting all the blame when it fails. Too few are talking about that. Everyone's talking about what the machine can do, but there's very little real deliberation about what's happening. And I think most, if you really ask them, CFOs, do you know what the cost of AI is in your company, right? They don't know. You ask the IT man, do you know what systems have AI, what AI is being used, and what people are using on their own subscriptions? They don't know. If you ask legal about the exposure, data protection exposure, and other legal exposures from people using AI and other things, they don't know. So they're looking into what I call, the never-ending governance workshop, right? They see it coming, it's happening, right? Because they know in the end, accountability is how you actually drive adoption and are allowed to keep on doing things. But the market is just talking about action. Market is talking about Claude bots, and fully autonomous systems, and see how much the machine can do. But does that really matter in enterprise settings?
I think in enterprises that there's always an area where people will go off and do some research, testing, playing around. It's a given. You've got to have that. Either they're doing it directly, or most of the big enterprises have created venture arms where they're doing this experimentation, right?
Yeah, experimentation. But now we're talking transformation, right? And we're talking building 17 data centers across Scotland, right?
Sure. But that is somebody saying, I've got a business model where I know I can make a shed load of money by putting these data centers because someone come along and buy the compute power, right? Regardless, it's going to happen. And that's not to do with AI. It might be driven by it at the moment, but actually the cloud journey has also been a big push for data centers. To your point about
AI, it's a push for cloud because this is the AI. You need cloud to get AI, so that's the reason why they want it.
But no, look, I think the piece that you said about governance is linked to the thing we talked about earlier, which is like we did with other new technologies. It's that whole, how do we create the operational center? You want to call it a center of excellence, a center of learning, a practice, whatever you want to call it, lots of terms. But that operational center needs to be designed first before you can put it and say, what tools should we use? I think this is the issue. We're being pushed a whole bunch of stuff because it's sexy and it's loud and it's being marketed really well. And actually, it does some pretty cool stuff. I've been looking at some of the use cases people doing with Fable. You sent me a link to Ethan Mollick, who was talking about his use of it, his isochrome map and all the rest of it done in a few hours or whatever it was. Right? But that's just showing the possibility. What isn't done is, how do I make this practical and applicable so that it covers and cuts across the enterprise? And to me, we're doing the same mistakes that happened with ERP, SRM, CRM, BPM, EAI, middleware, cloud, RPA, and now AI. And that same problem is, we don't have a structure that says, how do we put it in so it operates? Yeah. And that gap between having something that works in a small proof of concept or a pilot or something else to how does it work at scale in production? And that's been the challenge for every technology. So your point about governance and accountability is absolutely spot on, right? We're talking about it. But shouldn't that have been done in the first place by people who've got the capacity and decision-making capability at C-suite level or director of operations or director of engineering that says, any new technology, because we've got the data, we've got the history, we've got the war wounds, we've got the failed, programs and projects that haven't delivered success, why would we keep making the same mistake? So that's a question, right? Yeah. And that's decision taking. That's not about decision making. That's about choosing to be willfully ignoring those lessons and saying, we'll believe the marketing guys and we'll buy a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, but the reason why most of them always fails is that no one wants to either, maintain them or make sure they keep working or use them, because either they don't work perfectly to the process that I'm supposed to be doing, or IT says we can't maintain it, so we can't, have to kill it, or it's too costly. You always come back at someone's accountable for something where it doesn't fit. That's why you need to take all these tons of meetings and workshops to figure out, does this actually fit the entire value chain? It's not about what you can do. It's about, is it aligned with the business value across the entire, chain?
You're right.
Everyone.
You're right.
And that's why I think, that's why I get back to, accountability, trust and all that, because that's what we have now. That's what we have out there. We can map those out, but they're tedious. They take time. They're cumbersome, right? And so we say, oh, maybe we should just put an AI bot to do things, right? I've had so many of those, can I just get an AI to fix all my problems? I want an AI tomorrow that can do it, Your problem is not doing. The problem has never been doing. The problem's been doing it right.
Well, again, that comes with its own challenge, right? Doing it right means what is right. You've got to define right in the first place. And most people don't even spend time doing that. So
you need to live. Oh, Mahmood, you just need to live a good life. Just be happy, Mahmood. Yeah, okay. Well, how are you happy? What is a good life? It's not just breathing, is it? It's super difficult.
We've played, in a way, in a business sense, it's the analogy of, can I have a pill? Can I have an AI agent? That's what's happening right now. And it's not because I need to figure out what's going on. I want it so I can keep on doing what I'm doing. With an agent perspective, it's actually, you know what? It's really hard for us to do this stuff, or it's too expensive, and having an agent do it instead of a person means I can save money. But that is part of the journey from, what we started doing years ago, which is replacing people with something that is a tool. Originally, we did it with outsourcing. So we said, right, we'll ship the work somewhere else where it's cheaper. So that was the first part. Then we said, well, let's give it to some software. That's the second part. And now we're saying we're going to give it to an agent, because you know what? The agent will have the capacity, if you design it right, to be able to take these decisions that a person would have done in the first place. What is missing in all of this is judgment. And that's why we've always had the human in the loop conversation, or the human in the process, that says, if things don't go to plan, don't go to process, what do we do? Because the programming isn't there to you can teach an agent to self-learn. I think there are, loops and feedback loops to allow you to create, here's what happened, let me track it, decision A, decision B, decision C, whatever. And it can self-learn somewhat, i.e. train the model itself. But that doesn't mean to say it knows what kind of decision to take for what context.
No, what's good. That's also, that's the essence of the article from Ethan Mollick I shared with you in the preparation for this, where there's a recent one a couple of days back where he said that, and you said you just talked about taking a pill. You should call it a magic wand. People want a magic wand, get rid of my problems. Yeah. And he said he felt a year ago that he was like a wizard wielding, a model that could build things for him. And now he said he felt more like a patron, because suddenly he was out of the loop. It was just doing it. Sometimes it was working the new Fable 5 model, Mythos type model. It was working for 9 hours, and he had no clue the decisions it took in the middle. It just produced something great for him, but he was sort of like someone ordering things, but he didn't really know. He was not part of the process. How important is it to be part of the process, do you think, Mahmood, in the long term for driving value? I think this is interesting, because if we take the human out of the loop, don't we also take the machine out of the loop?
So who guards the guards, right? That's the question.
Yeah.
If you think about it, right, we have this throughout our societies already, right? We've got a series of checks and balances all the way up to government, and even then they don't work. So if you look at how we've organized ourselves as humans, we're trying to build in checks and balances along the way. And I don't think it should be any different when we come to these new types of technology improvements. I mean, right now we're talking about AI. I suspect in 12 months' time, we'll be talking about quantum. We're not far away, right? I've got some friends who work in this area, and they're saying that, whilst people were expecting 2030, 2031, 2027 might not be too far away for it to be a reality. And so maybe the data centers aren't just for AI. They're also about a new way of computing, which will then drive a different way of behavior in these models. So this medium-term thinking, the sci-fi 3 years, whatever you want to think about it, there are different facets to this conversation that, because we're focusing on just AI at the moment, I said earlier, there's a whole bunch of things going on around it. It's contextual. And your point about Ethan and him going along and saying, I'm, 9 hours and I just waited for the result. Actually, we do that in our personal lives already. How many of us have the capacity or the capability to do home improvement? I remember, right, as a kid, my dad would do the painting, decorating wallpaper, fix the pane of glass if I broke it with a football or something, or I'd help him fix it because I caused it. that kind of stuff, right? My mum, I remember sitting there fiddling around with her screwdriver and other bits, fixing her iron. It stopped working, so she would play around with it. So we've already shifted skills to other places where it's convenient for us. And I think this whole piece around agents is part of that journey.
Yeah, but then you're back to the whole responsibility, accountability thing again. Because if I order a carpenter and he messes up, I'll tell him, hey, you have to fix it again. But if I order Claude, Fable 5 to do things and it messes up, I'll be like, I can't do anything about it. And if my mom did something, well, she owned the house, she took the hit if it messed up.
Yeah, of course.
So, but the challenge is that a model doesn't exist in the world, And that's how I've been asking this question in many episodes when I talk to big software vendors. I ask them, when you become a system of action, do you also become a system of outsourcing? And will you take responsibility for the processes that I'm outsourcing to you because you're now performing them? And they're like, no, it's a different thing. But it isn't. It really isn't. That's exactly what you're saying right now.
There's another aspect to it too, which I will add. So yes, there has to be accountability. Your way of structuring your agent from the initial perspective, not the ones that spin off after that, right? Because they, again, are particular skills or something else that it's doing. But if you're creating an agent, it's not enough to just say, go away and do something. You have to go back and not forget the design thinking that says, what are we doing it for? And how do we make it accountable for what it delivers? It's not a question of leaving the agent and defining it and going off. It's actually thinking and saying, like we did with RPA, if you create a bot, it says, okay, here's your terms of reference. Here's what you're going to do. And as I understand it, based on my own playing around, and obviously you've had other people who may be way more competent than me, but you can create a prompt that has 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, whatever the context window is, of constraints defined.
You can have multiple agents. You can have multiple agents working in chains. That's what you're doing, right?
Right. But, so I don't think it's the agent itself. You have to have the human behind it that says, how am I going to define it? And if I'm going to define it, then you're turning it around. Right?
Then you're not just making the autonomous machine, but that's the point. From Ethan's point of view, right? The wizard is saying the incantations, right? But suddenly the machine is doing it on its own. So we need to define how to control a self-trained, uncontrolled super machine.
No, I disagree. You've got to. It's about choice. Humans, business leaders, people in the enterprise have to make a choice to say, do we want this kind of capability? That's the first question. Yeah. And if you don't answer that question first, then you get into this issue about you're the patron commissioning and then going off and doing it itself.
But do you know what the consequences might be? And that's the big problem for people right now because they have no clue.
But we have to do the hypothesis and work out, is this synthesis going to work in the way that we expect it? If not, then we course correct like we've done everything else.
Mahmood, that's going to be not the final word, but one of the final words of this podcast episode. It's been really great having you here. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And I have one final question for you before you go, right? And I'm looking forward to hearing what it is and if it's sort of related to everything we've been speaking about. So you're ready for the question?
I am.
So, Mahmood, what is the only constant?
For me, everything I've done through my business life, personal life, the only constant I've seen is human ingenuity. Right? For me, I've seen so many amazing changes. I look at these little videos and reels of what my desk was like when I started as a school kid and what I have today. I look at the world around me, the things we've achieved, how we've achieved them, what we keep coming up with. I've been to, as I got older, I've tried different things. But as I've got older, I've also realized that my work has allowed me to travel and see lots of different countries and lots of different people. And that constant for me, everywhere I went, was how people lived their life and came up with ways of doing things that suited what they were doing. So the ingenuity part, the human creativity, for me is a constant. It's always been there. I've seen it in painting, in art, in sports, in music, in technology, in writing, in academia, in learning. I could go on. So it always uplifts me meeting people because I see the sparks. You talked about where does that spark come from? And it's not necessarily always at work. And I think that for me, that is what's so great about where we live today. I'm a very optimistic person generally, and I'm not a doom and gloom merchant about, technology taking over. Because I've always looked at it as we are the tool makers and the tool users. And it's up to us to figure out how to use the tools best. We can use it for ill, we can use it for good. I've been in healthcare, I've been in hospitality, I've been in oil and gas, I've been in BFSI, I've worked in telco, I've worked in public sector, I've worked in charities in the fourth estate, I've been a trustee, I've been a non-exec director, I've been many things. And all of them, somewhere along the way, we kept coming up with issues and challenges. And yet, together or individually, people came up with something that said, what about? And that, for me, is what keeps me going. I'm very passionate about seeing how other people are choosing to come up with ways of doing things. Even the AI models, right? It to me, it's a great advancement. But seeing how people are using it, the use cases, that keeps me like, wow, I never knew that. A year ago, I'm part of a consulting network, and I did a 5-10 minutes on the use of one of the particular tools that Google brought out. But in that, there were 9 other people saying, here's how I'm using AI tools. Little bits and pieces. And some of them were saying, I now create my PowerPoints like this. Other people were, I've got a little engine that does almost like my whole strategy experience that says I could go away and research something about a strategy or come up with a strategy for a particular industry. So they were codifying what they'd got, using an agent, doing whatever. But the creativity part, the use cases that keep coming up. Even Ethan's work yesterday, when I looked at his isochrome map and his article, I was like, what a great way of thinking. I'd never even thought about it, that there's a map that tells you how far away you are from something. So that is the one, to me, the constant is about human creativity.
And it's a great constant, Mahmood. And you're absolutely right in how we keep on bumping into things that we can't fix, and then we end up fixing it. And I'm also, even though I'm saying that there's going to be a lot of, governance workshops and problems and all that, we had those in the past as well, and we sort of just gone through them and found a way, and things just, in the end, things commoditize and the dust settles, in different patterns, and then some more dust comes in, right? And it's always something in the air, right?
It is, and I love it, right? It means we keep going.
Mahmood, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for being on The Only Constant. It's been a real pleasure hosting you.
No, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it myself.
Thank you for listening. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend or a colleague.